Welcome to the icEdge Trainer Certification Learning Module Part 2. In this module, we are going to be covering the icEdge Profile Feedback and getting you familiar with both the online interactive feedback as well as the optional PDF download feedback format, how to navigate through that. You're going to be learning about the 3 different levels of feedback that are provided. And also I'm going to go over a very quick brief view or suggestions for teaching both individuals as well as teams. So to begin with, we're going to cover the icEdge profile and visualization. So we're going to begin with an understanding of what the icEdge assessment and feedback do and do not do. So the icEdge assessment gives a measure of an individual's general communication style and context dependence at work. So that's an important thing to remember. Respondents are asked to reflect on their general communication tendencies in a work setting and reminded of that several times during the time when they're taking the survey. So importantly, this is a tool that is descriptive, but not diagnostic. And so what we mean by that is it is telling the user what their typical communication behaviors and attitudes are, but it's not saying whether that's good or bad. So all of the communication styles, different levels of context dependence across message, relationship, space, and time are equally valid, equally good communication styles. The key is it's more diagnostic, understanding your own communication style and where it might come into conflict with other people's communication styles, and then learning the flexibility and skills in order to adapt and adjust to communication challenges. So moving on to the next point, the feedback identifies where to anticipate communication challenges, as well as how to recognize when those challenges are occurring and manage them. The feedback will promote awareness of one's own communication style, but also the communication styles of other people that they might encounter who have different styles, and also promotes flexibility. Finally, the feedback provides recommendations for how to adjust in interpersonal communication situations when communication styles clash, and suggestions for how to use one's own style as a strength. So as noted in the first learning module, the icEdge interactive visual model, based in Edward Hall's 4 sources of context that add meaning to verbal communication, are presented on a continuum. So a higher score means someone is more context dependent. So they're more likely to rely on and attend to contextual cues in the environment when they are communicating with others. So the score will be, and the person's dot will be located closer to the outer edge of the icEdge circle, which I'll show you on the very next slide. A lower score means someone is less context dependent, less likely to rely on and attend to contextual cues when communicating with others, and that person's score and or dot would be located to the inner edge of the icEdge circle. So this is what the interactive visual model looks like. It begins with a circle with 4 scores, and in a moment I'll go over the different levels of the model. But the important point here is that the outer edge of the circle, closer to the outer edge, means someone is more high context dependent. And so an easy way to remember this is the outer edge of the circle is the broadest part of the diagram, and it in fact runs into the whole external environment where this circle is located. So the outer edge is related to the environment. It's related to focusing on external cues or contextual cues that aren't contained in the words. Closer to the inner edge, or that circle in the middle, means someone is lower in context dependence. And so an easy way to remember that is the small circle reflects more of a focus, just on the self and the words, right? Mean what I say what I mean. So that's more low context dependent. So the profile and the feedback are organized in 3 levels. And it's organized that way because overall, the feedback report contains 28, at the lowest level, 28 different scores. And over years of administering and teaching, we found that 28 scores is really, it's too much information for people to absorb right from the start, and people tend to get overwhelmed. So what we did was we broke it into 3 levels, and at the first level, an individual understands their communication style, so they receive just 4 scores, and the communication style is really the broadest level. So in general, at the broadest level, are you more or less context dependent with respect to messages, relationships, space, and temporal cues? Then the second level breaks down each of those 4 quadrants of that circle on level 1 into 3 separate scores. So message context gets broken down into 3 separate scores that describe and begin to offer more detail on how that initial broad score was obtained. We call this level communication characteristics. And the third level is where you get the really rich feedback and really sort of the meat of the instrument, communication behaviors and attitudes. And there's 28 different scores that people can get at the third level. For each score, they get a quote to illustrate the nature of the dimension and how it might appear in everyday life. The participant sees a definition, an interpretation of their score, a sample item from the survey they took, some text identifying strengths and challenges of their score, and also some recommendations. So I'll show you what this looks like. So at level 1, as I mentioned, individuals will just see a single score for each of the 4 quadrants in the model. This is again on the online interactive feedback. And so you'll see here in this slide, for each of the 4 quadrants, the individual sees the definition of the quadrant. For example, on the far left, message style is the way you use and interpret literal versus subtle meaning and emotion in communication. And then underneath that, the user gets some specific interpretation about what their particular score means. So that's level 1. So again, this is the interactive online feedback. So to get to level 2, individuals would click on any of those quadrants. And here's what pops up. So at level 2, as I mentioned, each of the quadrants is divided up into 3 different scores. So here you can see that this person's message context dependence is comprised of their characteristics with respect to conflict management, expression, and interpretation. And so here, once again, the feedback provided at level 2, similar to level 1, includes a definition of the construct and then an interpretation of that individual's score. By clicking on any one of those quadrants, one of those pie slices, I would say, within each of the quadrants, you can go down to level 3. Level 3, as I mentioned, is the deepest level. It includes communication behaviors and attitudes. And here you can see, for example, if I had clicked on expression, 3 separate tabs pop up. And by clicking on any one of those, so persuade gently, communicate based on feelings, and communicate indirectly are the 3 subcomponents. So by clicking on any one of those, then I will get this definition along with a sample item from the survey and an illustrated quote. I'll be able to see an interpretation of my own score, strengths and challenges associated with my score and my style, and then specific recommendations for how I might use my style to benefit myself and others in terms of effective communication, and how I might overcome challenges if they emerge. In addition to the online interactive feedback, there is an optional downloadable PDF. So this would be if you are teaching a group, you wanted them to be able to print it out and bring it to class, or if you wanted to print it out and bring it to class for them, there's a downloadable PDF option. So this is obviously static, it's not interactive, you can't click around on it, but it does contain a cover sheet that includes the level 1 scores, so 1 score per quadrant of the circle model. And then it includes a page that looks something like this for level 2 and level 3 feedback. So message style, you may recall, is one of the main quadrants, a level 1. Within that, conflict management is a level 2 characteristic. And so this downloadable PDF sample here contains the individual's score for their level 2 conflict management. And you can see it's around 4.9 there under the scale on the right, and which is broken down further into the level 3 behaviors and attitudes. Avoid confronting conflict and avoid expressing disagreement. And again, over on the right, you can see how this individual, although their level 2 score is around a 4.8, looking deeper at level 3, you can see that's comprised of much more low context dependence with regards to confronting conflict, but much more high context dependence with regards to expressing disagreement. And so that's a sample of what that feedback looks like. So here I want to go into a little more detail about each of the scores that are provided at levels 1, 2, and 3. So level 1, message style. Level 2, as I mentioned, interpretation, expression, and conflict management. And just to familiarize you with how those scores are created, the interpretation is broken up into recognizing implicit messages and recognizing emotion. So a sample item from recognizing implicit messages would be, I catch on to what others mean, even when they do not say it directly. A sample item for recognizing emotions would be, I can tell when someone has something to tell me but is apprehensive about discussing it. The level 2 expression component is broken down into 3 scores at level 3. So communicate indirectly is one, and a sample item is, I use silence to imply my opinion. Communicate based on feelings. A sample item is, when I communicate, I trust my feelings to guide my behavior. And persuade gently, a sample item which would be reverse scored, is I am generally firm in pursuing my side of the issue. For conflict management, it's broken down into avoid confronting conflict and avoid expressing disagreement. Sample item for confronting conflict would be I generally avoid argument, and avoid expressing disagreement would be I try to avoid unpleasant exchanges. For relationship context dependence, the level 2 characteristics include openness, relational adjustment, and network reliance. So the openness dimension at level 2 consists of communicating cautiously and conveying facts sensitively at level 3. So a sample item for cautious communication would be reverse scored. I find myself initiating conversations with strangers if I want to get to know them. Conveying facts sensitively. A sample item is I often bend the truth if it protects the social harmony. Relational adjustment has to do with the degree to which someone adjusts what they say and how they say it based on the relationship. So the component adjusting for feelings, a sample item is I qualify, use maybe or perhaps, my language when I communicate. Adjust for status, a sample item is it is important to know someone's position so you can greet them accordingly. And adjusting for own image, a sample item is I do everything to avoid losing face in conversation. The level 2 component network reliance is comprised of 3 scores at level 3. Relying on networks, a sample item is I feel more comfortable doing business with someone if we both know the same people. Relying on long-term relationships, a sample item is the people I trust are those with whom I have had long-lasting relationships. And communicate across networks, a sample item is I consider my work colleagues an important part of my social circle. Okay, so the level 1 sensory style is broken down into 3 level 2 characteristics: dramatic expression, physical contact, and body language. The level 1 sensory style is broken down into 3 communication characteristics: dramatic expression, physical contact, and body language. Dramatic expression at level 3 is broken up into 3 subscores. Interruption, a sample item is I often interrupt other speakers. Avoiding silence, a sample item is I do not like silence in conversation. Loudness is engaging. A sample item is it annoys me when people speak loudly. Physical contact is broken up into 2 subscores: touching counterpart and standing near counterpart. So for touching counterpart, a sample item is during a conversation, I will frequently touch the person I'm talking to. And standing near counterpart, a sample item is when I am talking to people, I am not comfortable when there is a desk or some other barrier between us. Body language is broken up into level 3 into 3 attitudes, and they all address politeness with respect to closeness, eye contact, and facing one's counterpart. So a sample item for closeness is polite. Reverse scored is I would be pushy if I stood close enough to put my arm around someone I'm talking to. A sample item for eye contact is polite. Reverse score is when speaking to someone, I tend not to look at them. And a sample item for facing the other is polite, is when I directly face someone during a conversation, I show that I'm interested. And the slide here has a typo in it, I see. This should be temporal context dependence. The level 1 time management style is broken up on level 2 to the communication characteristics: sharing time, scheduling, and task structure. At level 3, the sharing time characteristic is represented with flexible with time. A sample item reverse scored, I view it as a sign of respect when my counterpart arrives on time for a meeting. The scheduling characteristic is broken up into flexible with deadlines and flexible with schedules. A sample item for flexible with schedules is I do not refer to a schedule or a date book often. A sample item for flexible with deadlines is I pay strict attention to deadlines. That would be reverse coded. And finally, task structure at level 3 is represented with multitasking. So a sample item is when I sit down at my desk, I work on one project at a time, which would be reverse scored. That gives you an overview of the way the feedback looks and the 3 different levels. Once you get online and start looking around your own profile, you will get a lot more information as well as definitions of each of the different levels and scores. And what I'd like to do briefly in the remaining time is to go over how you might design a program for teaching intercultural communication edge to an individual, perhaps in a coaching session, or to teams. So for example, if you have student teams. So when I'm teaching this to individuals, the first thing I like to cover are, what are the key theoretical constructs and what does the profile look like? And then ask the learner what result confirmed something that they already knew about themselves. And sometimes people come up with just really right off the top, they come up with something that they already knew about themselves. And what I do then is probe for deeper understanding. So give an example of when you communicated this way. Then you can help talk through it, unpack the situation, and explore how your learner developed these communication norms that they already knew about themselves. And this is a good opportunity to talk about some of the roots of communication style. Then I ask the learner what result surprised you. And again here, probe for deeper understanding. So give an example of when you communicated in this way and unpack the situation. Here's when I first start looking more deeply at level 2 and level 3 to tease apart the dimension into smaller components. And here you can also highlight useful recommendations moving on going forward. Oftentimes when you look to level 3, that level 2 and level 3, that's where the participant starts to see that, perhaps conflict management is comprised of different preferences, different communication norms. And so the result that I saw surprised me because I wasn't considering that it can be broken down into these different norms. Then it's important to develop a plan to work through the whole profile, giving the learner self-reflection assignments, specific goals for when and where to apply the recommendations. Importantly, this is a very brief overview, and there's much more detail and examples of how to design a program for individuals in the module Teaching Applications for Individuals on the Dropbox for icEdge certified trainers. So when I'm teaching teams, I likewise start by explaining the key theoretical constructs. I would also go over how to understand and read a comparison profile. I didn't show you an example of that in this particular session, but you will be seeing that in the trainer certification. So for teams, I would start out asking, where do teammates mostly cluster together? So where can you see on the profile reports places where there's a lot of similarities within the team? And then discuss implications for how the team can use that to help them effectively communicate. For example, say on message context dependence, if everyone is high on avoiding disagreement, that could lead to some problems for a team that needs to really think through things and come up with innovative ideas, right? So how will you generate the challenge and debate needed to develop innovative ideas if everyone on the team likes to avoid disagreement? What communication channels, what mechanisms can you put in place to help the team engage in that more sort of free back and forth, challenging one another, brainstorming kind of communication? Then I would ask, where do teammates split into multiple clusters? And again, discuss implications for effective team communication. So here what you're looking for is subgroups, right? So an example would be in time context dependence, if you have a team of 4 people, if 2 people run on clock time and 2 people run on event time, it's a recipe for subgroup formation and relationship conflict. So talking through with the team, allowing them to come up with ideas for how they're going to be able to manage that so it doesn't lead to conflict. Then I would look to any of the dimensions where one teammate is an outlier. Okay, so all the team is clustered together except for one person who's quite different from everyone else. So here I've come up with an example with space context dependence. Imagine a team where everyone is high on dramatic communication except Bill, who is very reserved and probably uncomfortable around expressive communicators. So the team needs to discuss this and create norms and procedures to ensure, one, that Bill isn't completely uncomfortable every time there's team meetings, but also Bill has opportunities to contribute regularly to team discussions. Just like with teaching individuals, I would look to levels 2 and 3 to tease apart each dimension into smaller components. Identify useful recommendations and insights that the team can put into a team contract. And once again, there is more information on how to design a program and different cases you could use with teams in the module Teaching Applications for Teams on the Dropbox. So first of all, we want to be sure that you understand what icEdge does and doesn't tell you. And the key point here is that it's not diagnostic. Right? We're not telling people that they have a low score on something that they need to improve over time. We've gone over how to navigate and understand the 3 levels of interactive feedback, as well as a sample of the downloadable PDF feedback. I went over the 3 measurement levels, so 4 styles at level 1, 12 characteristics at level 2, and 28 behaviors and attitudes at level 3. And I've also gone over some teaching ideas and want to be sure you have familiarity with how to introduce the concepts, guide some feedback interpretation, and focusing particularly on self-awareness and identifying specific situations for your learners and clients where they can apply the recommendations and what they've learned. The additional learning modules that you can find on Dropbox, so the trainer homework, there's 3 modules there, and this is one of those 3. For use in the classroom, there are 2 slide decks. Both are introductions to intercultural communication EDGE, but one is more brief that I would recommend grabbing slides from when you have an MBA or corporate audience. And then the other goes much deeper into communication theory, and I would recommend grabbing slides from there when you're teaching university or college courses. And then, as I mentioned just a few moments ago, 2 more slide decks with additional information and ideas for how to teach icEdge to individuals as well as teams.